So today we are going to give a brief overview of the New South Wales office. And to cover all areas of interest, we're going to have facts and numbers as well as stories from our collection. So you'll be able to have those both different sides. So we're going to look at the location and the teams, the people who work here in New South Wales, and then also some unique things that we have in the collection in New South Wales. So some of those stories are going to be the Australian Women's Land Army, Cockatoo Island, censorship clips, and what we're looking at sort of highlighting next. And so, yeah, any questions you have, pop them in the comments and we'll be really happy to answer them at the end. So the New South Wales office is located, I just realised, has that moved through? Why is it not moving? Are my screens moving through?
No, you're not, but let me... oh, there you go.
A screen now? Okay, I had the wrong one up. I apologize, everybody.
All good.
All right, so the New South Wales office is located in Chester Hill in Sydney, which is almost halfway between the City of Sydney Centre and the Parramatta Centre. And so this is the street view here. So as you can see, it's really fantastic to be able to walk in here every day with that landscape. And so for anyone who has visited our site before, next time you come, you'll see that we've got brand new signage, which makes it much easier to see where you're coming at. So we're very happy with that. And this is the building itself. So this building was built for purpose for the archives in the 1970s, and it's slowly been added to and updated over the years. And the staff here really love this building because it is so large and changing its functions over time. Some of the areas can kind of have a Winchester House feel to it. So there's doors you'll find that sort of lead nowhere, and strange stories about trying to work out where the swimming pool used to be or where the ping pong table used to be. And these sort of tales of the public service in the 70s sort of become stuff of legend. So at the moment, we have 75 staff in the New South Wales office. So that includes full-time and casual and contractors who are working on different archival projects with us. And we're open to the public to come into the research centre from Wednesdays to Fridays to review original records. So the people you're most likely to meet when you come to visit the New South Wales office are the front of house staff. And so here we have a setter who normally greets you. She's fantastic. And then we have some of our research team, including Sam and myself. So just the people who could be convinced to have their photo taken. And so one of the reasons that I'm showing the foyer and the research centre is that we're actually currently looking at ways to rejuvenate it. It hasn't had an upgrade in a while. And so as members, we're really keen to hear your feedback and suggestions about what you would like to see in those areas. So again, with that, you can put comments and ideas in the comments field, or you can let us know directly. So we're really interested in hearing back. And we'll talk a bit about that at the end as well, about some of the things we're looking at for that. So in the repository itself, we've got a lot of storage. We're the second largest site across the country. So we have 188 kilometres of shelving at the National Archives. And you can see some of it there. And with that much shelving, it means we have to use ladders a lot. And this is a really fantastic poster, old poster that's been up on one of our repositories forever called from the National Safety Council of Australia. You might be able to see that in the bottom left of the poster. And so it's just reminding people to use ladders safely. And that's a couple of staff in one of the repositories as well. So the general repositories that we have that hold our paper records, we keep them at 20 degrees Celsius and 50 degrees relative humidity. So that's the best storage conditions for paper records. But we also have other repositories on site to store other kinds of materials and formats that we also have. So we've got what we call a working vault, an isolation vault, and the cold store. So the working vault is 15 degrees, the isolation vault is 8 degrees, and the cold store is 4 degrees. And they all have quite low humidity because it's the combination of temperature and humidity that's really important for the storage of records. And so in that, we store a lot of our other records, our AV records, our film, our negatives, our glass slide photographs, all the different types of formats that we have that we're going to be showing you some of today in the records. So you can see here in the images some of the shelving for 1/4 inch and film in the cold vault. And there's sort of specialized doors that we have to keep the temperatures stable. And we have here as well some of the long corridors of all the repositories and our isolation vault. And we store a lot of our nitrate film in the isolation vault, and Sam's going to be talking to us about that. And just as an aside, you can see the long corridor. Sometimes I can't help myself. If I'm in early in the morning, I try and go up to one of the repositories and walk the whole thing without any lights on, just because it's kind of spooky, as I said, with the Winchester sort of atmosphere of the building that we have. So with the teams, we have all of that storage. We have actually a lot of preservation stuff on site in New South Wales. We're really lucky to have that. So this is, again, people vacating, so their photo isn't taken, but this is our film preservation lab, where we look at a lot of our moving image film to make sure it's not buckled or a vinegar syndrome, and to prepare it for digitization. So we have that. We've got a lot of different audiovisual studios for the different work. Here is our film sound and one of the machines we use for digitizing film sound. We've also got audio studios, and this is a great image because it shows that we've got lots of different equipment for digitizing different obsolete media. So we will digitize gramophones, we'll digitize cassette tapes, 1/4 inch. So we have to have the equipment and keep that up to date and have the expertise on how to use all those various machines to digitize the different records that we have here. So there's a lot of really specialised knowledge in the Sydney office. And that also moves over to our paper and photographic preservation team. So we've got a lot of maps and plans and all kinds of different paper records, starting from really old paper to onion skin paper, computer paper, facsimile paper, which, as some of you know, fades very quickly. And so we have different teams who can look and restore all of those different kinds of records and the different issues we have with them. Same with our photographic. So we might just have photos themselves, but we also might have negatives and x-rays and all different kinds. So you can see here the different records. We've got a slide there that someone is trying to, of an x-ray that someone's trying to fix because it's been put on a pin when they put it on a file and it's got a hole in the middle of it. And then that's also an x-ray that we have in some of our Department of Veteran Affairs records and immigration records. Quite often there's different scans and things like that. So that's a very old one that we have there, which needs to be tested to make sure, to see if it's nitrate, and depending on what kind of format and material it is, that will determine whether it gets stored somewhere else from where it has been. We also have the restoration and preservation of lots of different records, the paper records. And you can see here different types of mold. So the image on the left is an actual record that's got some water damage on it, and they're preserving that there. And on the right, it's actually one of the boxes that we store records in. And if it's not stored in proper conditions, and especially if the humidity is high, it can really grow mold and that can spread. So that's a record that was found that was then sent for treatment, so that the mold didn't spread through the records. So we've got a lot of expert staff who sort of go through all the records before they're digitized, before researchers come and look at them, and we go through and check things regularly to make sure that everything has the best chance of surviving into the future. So back to our research team again, because they'll just be pleased that we're showing the photos. it's the stories that we have in the archives that is incredibly interesting, as well as that sort of side of looking after the records. So now we're going to show different stories of some of the records. So I'm going to hand over to Sam, who's going to tell us about Cockatoo Island and nitrate film.
Hey, Sam, you're muted.
I'm still muted. I'm sorry.
There you go.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, loud and clear.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, so some of the oldest films in the National Archives collection chronicle the shipbuilding activities at Cockatoo Island Dockyard. They were filmed between 1936 and 1942 and survive on highly flammable nitrate stock. I am going to discuss the challenge of preserving these rare combustible curios. In March 1936, a large crowd gathered at Sydney's Cockatoo Island Dockyard to celebrate the launching of a newly completed vessel, HMAS Swan. It was an elegant-looking naval sloop designed for Royal Australian Navy manoeuvres in the tropics. A champagne bottle broke over her imposing bow, and she slid effortlessly into the harbour below. As the grand ship moved down the slipway, several onlookers doffed their hats to her in honour of the occasion. A motion picture film from the National Archives collection captures this moment in time. The footage is one of 5 newsreel segments about shipbuilding at Cockatoo Island during the 1930s and 40s, and all are assembled into a single reel of film. Another segment depicts the then Prime Minister, Robert Menzies, laying down the keel of a cargo steamer, River Clarence. In a speech given for the occasion, he professes the astonishment at the rapid growth of Australian shipbuilding since 1936. These newsreel segments form part of a wider unique collection and provide a tantalising peep into one of the most productive periods of the dockyard's 100-year history. However, the films are shot on exquisite but highly unstable nitrate stock and require specialised preservation treatment in order to survive. Cellulose nitrate was the standard medium for professional motion picture production prior to 1948. It contains a high number of silver particles and, as a result, produces striking imagery with exceptional clarity and contrast. And it's because of nitrate film that the saying, the silver screen, came to be. So when people went to see the movies back in the old days and they saw Greta Garbo on the silver screen, the term silver screen came from the fact that those films were shot on nitrate and it looked fantastic. Unfortunately, the chemical makeup of nitrate film is similar to gunpowder, and when exposed to moderate temperature or humidity environments, it may self-combust. Deterioration occurs when the porous film reacts to moisture in the air and it begins to produce nitric acid. At different stages of decay, it emits a pungent toxic odour, turns brittle and yellow, and eventually wells into a sticky, noxious mass. Due to its flammability and other inherent characteristics, nitrate is now regarded as a dangerous good under many storage and transportation guidelines. This is an example of a very deteriorated nitrate film. It is not from our collection. This image is courtesy of the National Archives and Records Administration in the USA, and it's a photograph of a deteriorated nitrate film in 1969. The National Archives has adopted various precautionary measures to ensure that the early Cockatoo Island films and the wider nitrate collection survive intact. These include the storing of nitrate materials in low temperature controlled vaults, making film-to-film preservation copies onto polyester safety stock, and undertaking in-house scanning of the collection for public access. This means that the films will remain available to the public on a preservation quality digital platform as we work towards our future digital preservation goals. Presented here for your enjoyment is the aforementioned footage of shipbuilding at Cockatoo Island during the 1930s and 40s, which we have digitised from the original nitrate film reel.
This place over the last few years would, I believe, make a remarkable romance. It is, in my opinion, an astonishing thing to look back over the last 4 or 5 years and realize the development that has taken place all over Australia in the production of ships.
Thank you for watching.
Thank you very much for that, Sam. That was fantastic. I find it amazing every time how beautiful old film is in comparison to more modern technologies like videotape, which are so much newer, but when we copy them are so much more out of focus. It's incredible, the different technologies, but it's that balance of what is safer as well. So it's really interesting. So the next subject we're going to look at from things that we've taken from our collection to show you today is the Australian Women's Land Army, which is often referred to as AWLA. And we're going to start by showing again a newsreel that was on 35mm that was digitized by the team here.
Today, there fights behind our armed forces another army vital to victory. This is the Australian Women's Land Army, producing essential foodstuffs. On Australian farms, they're doing a man-sized job, ploughing, planting, driving tractors, milking, and spraying fruit trees. There is a place for you in this front line of food production, because the ever-increasing demands of our fighting men and civilians make food production a matter of more national importance than ever. Women and girls from 18 to 50, this is a job for you. Permanent recruits are paid a good minimum wage and keep. Wear this smart uniform and work in this serviceable one. Special training is available for promotion as matrons and camp supervisors. Sometimes it's playtime and the Land Army takes to water. Then the only thing uniform is the fun. So join the Women's Land Army now and help your country in its national war effort. For today, food, no less than arms, is a weapon of conquest.
So, as I said, the Australian Women's Land Army is often referred to as AWLA, and it organised women to work in the Australian agricultural industries during World War II to help with the huge demand for food and deal with the depletion of resources with so many men enlisting in the war. And it was inspired by the Women's Land Army in the UK. And a push for work like this to be centralised and administered by the government was spearheaded by a woman called Ada Beveridge, who was at that time the president of the CWA. When the war first broke out, there wasn't an official land army. Instead, from 1939 to 1941, there were different volunteer groups trying to come together and help where they could. But you can track the formation of the Australian Women's Land Army in our records. And it's really interesting because it highlights how you can find records, but also that movement of tasks and responsibilities through different government agencies and through federal and state governments as well. So the earliest records we have for AWLA is letters such as this, which is from Ada Beveridge to Prime Minister Menzies. And so it's in one of our Department of Defence series, which is just titled very basically correspondence files, but you can find really fascinating things in there. When I was looking through, there's also things on the prisoner of war camps, and also a lot about the reserved occupations during the war. So the occupations which meant that you didn't enlist to go fight, which again is very interesting. When we were looking through them was during lockdown, and so it was during that period of what in this time and with these situations do we considered kind of those reserved occupations or those essential occupations where you were still going out, and what was considered that during the war. So it's really interesting, the government administering those kinds of things through time. But back to the AWLA records. So in this letter, Ada sends to Menzies, and then there's a sort of an internal memo reply where they say it is not considered desirable that a further reply be forwarded at present, as individual women's organisations such as the Land Army are the responsibility of state authorities. So they're very clearly there in the middle of 1941 saying, no, it's a state matter. But then in December of 1941, Japan entered the war and everything shifted again. So within a few weeks of that event, on the 19th of January in 1942, the federal government established a new agency, which was called the Directorate of Manpower. And if you look on our records on Record Search, you can see a really thorough summary of that in the agency listings. And that's something you can see listed here. So part of the description we have here is that history of that agency. So its purpose was to mobilise and organise the labour resources of the Commonwealth so as to meet the requirements of the Defence Forces and the needs of the industry in production of munitions and the maintenance of supplies and services essential to the life of the community. So the Prime Minister said on that date that a nationwide system of national service officers should be created. And so here you can see that shift between federal and state. So these officers, he said, will be staffed primarily by taking over existing state labour organisations. There will be at least one in each military district and Commonwealth. State or local governing facilities will act as agents. So it's that shifting of who's looking after things, so things can be organised in different ways. And here is a notice that the Directorate put out for all youth between the ages of 14 and 16 to register so that they could put them to work for different things. So overall, during that time, they had really extensive powers over what Australians could or could not do, including the powers to exempt a person from military service or stop them enlisting, or to stop people from working in the job of their choice and prevent them from leaving their job and moving them into different fields. So there was a lot of that to sort of make sure things were running together as a whole. And so a part of that, or as attached to that, was the Australian Women's Land Army as part of that Directorate of Manpower. So interestingly, AWLA members petitioned for the organisation to be recognised as a legitimate service alongside others, but ultimately it wasn't. And probably for that reason, also, unfortunately, many of the records were destroyed at the end of the war. So in New South Wales, in the New South Wales office, we're really lucky to have all the records. So we're the sort of only state that does have a large collection of records about people who were part of it. So we have correspondence and we have personnel cards that really build up an amazing picture of the Land Army and who were part of it. And we've actually completely described and digitized those records. So you can go online now and look through them. But I warn you, like once you start, you spend hours just sort of reading through them. So I'll just show you a couple here. So this is a personnel card for someone called Hazel Ernst. So she enrolled very early in Oola's inception in February of 1942. And there's information that builds up a picture of who she was. So on this card, even though it doesn't have lots of different things on it. So she signed up when she was 18 years of age. She lived in Mossman and she worked as a dressmaker before she signed up. So we can see that sort of, we can build up a really good picture of the people who were part of it. So we can see as well that she worked out in Batlow and Leeton, picking silver beets and apricots. And on the back of these cards, quite often there is notes on the person. And so on it says on the back that she was a peculiar mixture. As well as that she persists in talking after lights out, which I think, fair enough. So it's really interesting because, again, it's interesting you build up a picture of the person, but you also build up a picture of the attitudes of the time and what was considered noteworthy. And so we also have in our collection some really wonderful oral histories of all the members talking about their time in the Land Army many years later. So a lot of the women were from cities and they didn't have experience working on farms, but they worked really hard and were embraced by the farming community. So here's a short snippet of someone talking about their time in the Land Army.
My own personal feelings was the worst job was picking cotton. It was dreadful. We were paid by how much you picked. Well, I think I would have starved if I had to rely on just what I picked. I wasn't a very good picker and I had infected fingernails, which seemed to be caused from picking the cotton out of the bolls. It made a terrible mark on your fingers and very hard. It was all hand-picked those days. These days they have mechanical picking. Nobody ever picks cotton now. The Land Army girls were there in their hundreds. It was desperately needed for uniforms and so forth.
So this is another one of the personnel cards, and it's one of my favourite records, a part of this collection. So she enrolled early again, and you can see here that she lived in Waverton and she worked in home duties. And it's interesting because it also says that she was adopted and that her real name was Jean Walker. So it's interesting, again, those little bits of information that you can pick up that can be hard to track down. And so on the back of the card, we have really interesting comments. So in September of 1943, Mr. Moss Robertson wrote her a reference saying, "It would be difficult for me to overestimate the value of the help which he gave during a most difficult period." And you can, just that wording, there's a lot of emotion in there and how valuable this Land Army was. And again, you can see those, you can build up that information in these quite basic records. And it's really interesting as well, sort of the conditions that the women lived in and sort of the community that was built up. So again, here is another clip from the oral histories that we have about the women, and they lived in hostels and boarding houses, and even in some instances in showground buildings. So you can imagine there was a great sense of camaraderie among the women. So here's a snippet of someone talking about that.
My farm was Mr. White's farm. They grew avocado, pears, bananas, every kind of vegetable you could imagine, custard apples, and we chipped tomatoes all day long. To begin with, our backs, they were just stiff and sore. We couldn't stand up. At night we'd come home and we didn't have showers like they do these days. We had a row of big tubs. It was under a shelter and a little partition between each tub, and you could talk to each other. We carried the water from a copper outside, which was boiling out in the open with buckets. We put the water in our tubs, and we sat in the tubs and soaked out the stiffness of the day and chatted to each other through the little compartments. And it was a happy time. It really was. We made wonderful friendships. And then when we had that lovely bath and went inside, we'd have a beautiful tea waiting for us, and then afterwards we'd get around the old piano and have a sing-song or do something like that of an evening. And we had lovely times together.
I really love that description, and I've never heard a bath described in such a way where you can just really imagine how wonderful it was to have that bath at the end of the day. So we have those personal records and those oral histories, and we also have the correspondence records for New South Wales. And so it highlights a lot of the workings and organisation of Orla. So here we have the enlistment, some information about enlistment of women into Orla. So we have a lot of that, which you might be familiar with for enlisting men to be in the services, but we also have this information for the Land Army. So this was in Manly, in this particular example, and the recruitment drive here was undertaken by a woman called Mrs. Uden, and it sort of hits her comments on the recruitment drive. So she had, it says here, she spent quite a lot of time talking unsatisfactory applicants out of the Land Army. One informed her that she must have her wine before going to bed every night. That has 2 exclamation points. So they didn't want wine drinkers at the time. And other correspondence in it shows the needs of the time and also how different people have different communication styles and even how it's changed over time as well. So at the end of 1945, looking through the records, you can tell there was a clear shortage of garter elastic. So we have here a memo saying, I wish to acknowledge the receipt of 432 yards of garter elastic and thank you for arranging this delivery. So that's that there. And then we have another note in that file that says, I have to advise you that 864 yards of garter elastic have been received and not the 900 yards, as you mentioned in yours. So making sure that they know that there's some missing garter elastic there. And then we have a telegram with the very succinct, no garter elastic received for Batlow District. And what's really funny is when we look at this in these days, if the modern understanding is if you put things in all capital letters, you're meant to be yelling. But that wasn't the case in a telegram. That was just the way they were sent at the time. But when we first looked at this record, we were like, oh, this person is very angry. But it's not. It's just that that was the communication form at the time. So some history of the sort of the end of the Land Army. In 1943, the Federal Cabinet endorsed the Orla as an official force service. And so the organisation was going to be formally constituted under the National Security Regulations. However, the final draft of these regulations was not completed until 1945 and not acted upon before the end of the war. And so consequently, members of Orla did not receive the same benefits as members of other women's services. And it was disbanded in December 1945. So for many years after the war, the contribution of Orla was largely forgotten. There were no post-war benefits, schemes or honours available to the land girls, and they did not march in Anzac Day parades until 1985. Some recognition was given when in 1995, Orla members became eligible for civilian service medals, recognising their contribution during World War II. And in 2012, they were invited to attend a dinner at Parliament House in Canberra with the then Prime Minister Julia Gillard. And I think her speech really sums up sort of what Orla did. And so she said, "You went to take up the work of the men who had left for the front. Some of them were your fathers, your brothers, or even your sons. In doing so, you brought victory closer, just as if you had picked up a rifle yourself. It is only possible because women of courage like you were there first, in the tough years, the desperate years, when the nation faced its ultimate test. You helped Australia pass that test, and today the nation thanks you." And I always find that a very moving speech, because I think it really encapsulates in those times of need how everyone in the country sort of comes together, and it's those stories that we can really tell from our records. So from moving on from one that makes me a bit emotional to, oh no, that's right, we've got one more clip of the oral history we'll show you before we move on to the next one.
The Land Army was the happiest time of my life. I really loved every minute of it, and I loved to talk about it, and I loved to meet the girls that I was in camp with and think about our Land Army days. It was something that was very unique, and it was really a shame that we weren't recognised as a service, because we were every inch a service. However, that is in the past now, and we can only know that we did a good job in the wartime when it was really needed for food on the wartime front.
So yes, I think that really encapsulates the value of that, and how fantastic it is that we have those records in the New South Wales office. And when we do, we encourage you to go through and look at them, because they're really wonderful. So on to a lighter note, or something that we contain in the New South Wales office in both paper and AV records, and that is information about the vampire. So the vampire, as we know, appears throughout time in spooky stories and tales that terrify us. And over that time, vampires and how they're depicted change from remnants of the night to sparkling visages of beauty. But did you know that in Australia, we were so frightened of vampires and the rest of their monstrous family that horror films were banned for 20 years. So again, luckily, we hold the records of the censorship records, and we can find the vampires hidden within them. So the ban actually started in 1948. So when talking about the genre of horror films, the chief censor, J. Alexander, said at the time that this type of film has no cultural or entertainment value, and its appeal extends only to a very limited section of the community, a section whose mental outlook should not be fed with films of this nature. And he also added, in addition, such films are a source of potential danger to women in a delicate state of health. And so this is an image of a woman in delicate state of health that we took from the censorship clips, clearly after hearing of the chief censor and his concerns. So back to the letter that he wrote, he said, "It has accordingly been decided as a matter of censorship policy that any film which would normally be classified as horror will in future be refused registration." And then we have another record in our collection saying that the minister at the time endorsed that decision. They're saying, yes, we want to ban horror films, basically, by not registering them. So what other evidence do we have where we can see this attempt to protect us from the horrors of horror? So we have one here. This is from our custom series. So all of these move through our customs agencies. And the distributor wants to import a film called Daughter of the Vampire in 1967. And you can see again on the right-hand side of that record that it was rejected. And so it's really interesting because we don't have a lot of these rejected. That is because the distributors just stopped trying to import them. So sometimes they tried and they were rejected, but they also knew that the ban was on, and so they just didn't try as well. So the ban lifted in the 1960s, and there were lots of different events that impacted this, from court cases gauging what could be considered offensive to the modesty of the average man, and to this record where we have of news clippings where journalists did a survey, reported on a survey conducted by a schoolgirl in North Bondi about what her friends saw on TV. So in that, she says that she did a search, and no films about Dracula or Frankenstein were seen by her friends. And so while the ban was lifted and violent was fully lifted, violent and explicit scenes were still trimmed from films and television shows. So they allowed them in, but they also trimmed some of the records. And we have that film here. And so again, it's really fascinating to look at. It can be just a couple of frames, or it can be 10 seconds or things like that. But different bits were sort of cut out. And people will probably might know the story of Doctor Who, that there were there's episodes of Doctor Who that were destroyed that we don't have copies of, and they found small parts of it in Australia here at the archives as part of our censorship clips. So the fact that we cut it out means that we have some record of it. So I was going to show you some of the clips of the vampire footage that was taken out, but because they are so short, when you watch them in motion, they're a bit hard to make sense of, and so it's actually easier to see what was cut out if you look at the still images. So this is a picture of Peter Cushing, famous for his roles in horror films and in films like Star Wars, and you can see a cross through his face, and that is a marking made by the censor that's saying that that scene needs to be removed. And when you do start looking through the censorship footage, you can see a pattern of what was removed. So we have a selection of vampires with their fangs attacking people. So here's one vampire. Here is another vampire with their fangs attacking. And again, you can see a mark on the cheek of where it was told to be cut out. We also have a range of pictures of pretty young ladies who are about to be attacked. So this is one lady. This is the lady we saw before, about to be attacked. This is another lady about to be attacked. Another lady. We have quite a few ladies about to be attacked. And we also have a range of men valiantly hunting and killing vampires. And they're always quite emotional about it in these scenes as well. So here we have one man hunting and killing a vampire. Another man who's just hunted and killed a vampire. And this is my favorite vampire hunter. It's a priest, and he discards the stake at the end and sobs after killing the vampire. We also have a range of vampires shocked to be dying. As we know, vampires are immortal, so it always comes as a surprise. So this is a vampire shocked to be dying, another vampire shocked to be dying, and a vampire shocked to be dying. This is a fantastic one because he has quite an extended death scene. So we have him here, and we also have him here. So as I said, I'm not going to show the censorship clips, even though it's quite mild. One, it's hard to see, and two, just having lots of attacks or screams all in one go is a bit jarring. So instead, I put out a clip that we have of when the ban was lifted and we started getting vampires back into the public consciousness. The ABC made a series of adverts, to encourage people to watch the ABC. And in one of them, they used vampires. So this is from 1975.
hell, you see.
Come home to a bit of new blood with ABC.
You're at home with ABC.
So they're a great range of ads from the ABC from the mid-70s. A lot of them are quite risque. It's really interesting, but that opening sort of montage you see at the beginning of the man rushing home to watch television plays at the beginning of every one, and it really sort of captures the heat and traveling on an unconditioned train and trying to get home. But you can see here that the vampire was distracted by his victim by the television and watching the ABC instead. So that's just a brief glimpse today of some of the wonderful things we have in the New South Wales collection. We hope you come and visit us. And so some of the things we're looking at next, and we'd love to get your feedback on, is we've got a fantastic range of post office records. The building of post offices and the establishment of post offices all throughout New South Wales, and they have some really amazing old records in there. So we've got a project at the moment where we're going through and digitizing all of those. We've also got a project where we're describing the ABC scripts. So before the ABC was mandated by the Archives Act to keep a lot of their significant recordings, they weren't kept, but we have a lot of the scripts for the different recordings. So we might have scripts of the Queen's presentations and things like that. So they're being described and digitized as well. And we're also digitizing a lot of our consignment lists for our undescribed records so that they can go up on Hive. So everyone can help by describing those and getting more records controlled and searchable. So that's our presentation today.